Good morning, all of the people who love the library. I have the privilege of sitting next to a man I have adored and admired for a very long time, who is not only here to tell us some stories, he's here to make an amazing donation to the library. And in the process, he's going to start explaining, telling stories and history about the things that are in the box that is beside him. So to all who will see this, Master Ron K has been hanging around this crazed community for as long, if not longer than I have. And we're not going to go into the number of decades that entails.
49 years.
What
5 years.
What he said.
It's always 5 years.
9 years.
So there are a lot of stories. There are a lot of people. There are a lot of toys and tales that are bopping around in this man's history, therefore his brain. And some of those experiences he's going to be sharing with us in a series of videos. This is number 1. Sir, 49 years, huh?
Mm-hmm. Fucked my first letterman, or was fucked by my first letterman when I was 17.
What brought you into this community?
I was hitchhiking. Guy on a bike, really nice chopper, pulled up, asked me if I wanted to ride. I said, sure. While we were going down the road, he asked me if I wanted to smoke a little dope. I said, why not? We got to his place, smoked a little dope. He asked me if I wanted to fuck. I said, okay.
Alrighty.
And he fucked me. And there was a little bit of this and that in it. And I was intrigued. It's that simple. It's been all downhill since.
Downhill, uphill, around the river, around the road.
But he was my first top.
And you were intrigued.
Mm-hmm.
Then what?
Then I spent a few years being taught by an old guard trained leatherman who saw the top in me and expected me to learn the craft starting on my knees, and gave me the space to begin to experiment, to ask questions, to learn. Eventually, he promoted me to being a top.
Geographically, where were you?
Los Angeles.
Was he solo or was he part of a larger group?
He was part of a larger group. I didn't get involved with the larger group. I just was involved with him and his partner.
Now, at some point in time, the military called you.
Yeah, I enlisted in the Marine Corps when I was 17.
What prompted you to become a Marine?
Truth? I want somebody to kill me.
Could you be a tad bit more specific?
I was a bit crazy. And basically had a death wish. So my enlistment contract not only was for infantry, but it was for Vietnam.
Did the Corps' discipline in any way inspire this SM journey?
No.
Did the journey inspire you in any way in the Corps?
I'm not sure that I would say that it did, but I would say that they informed each other after I got out of the Corps quite a bit. The discipline the focus, the constant mind games of trying to solve problems and figuring out how to get the responses that I wanted. That relentless improvise, adapt, and overcome.
Both for yourself and your men.
Mhm. And my women.
Well, thinking in terms of at that point, there would have been women in the Corps.
Well, no, I wasn't with women in the Corps, but yeah, I had women in my life. Unfortunately, the two worlds never met at that point, because at that point in time, a bisexual was not an acceptable partner to most gay men, not to begin to talk about the Leathermen in the area. So to the Leathermen, I was gay, and to the women, I was straight.
What did it feel like emotionally to have to walk that line?
I resented it.
And
I
yet
am
you
who
did
I
it.
am. I'm the same human being, but because of the prejudices that existed at the time, I couldn't be who I was. I had to be gay or straight. So I had a gay life and I had a straight life.
Congratulations for being able to pull that off.
Yeah, I pulled it off a lot better than I realized, I guess, because one of my oldest friends is Guy Baldwin, and he will say to this day that the first time he met me, he thought I was gay. And he's got pretty good gaydar.
Yes, he does.
Yeah, but that's just part of who it was. And then, I don't know, what was it, late 80s, we started finally breaking down that barrier.
Yeah. Along came the NLA and that helped.
Yeah, it did. But yeah, I resented it a lot. That not, everybody's trying to advocate being who you are and being okay with who you are and coming out and all that. And yet they were telling me, because of the traditions and the ways things were and the attitudes, that I couldn't be me.
So I want to back you up. There are a lot of myths, as you know, about the old guard. There are a lot of people who say it doesn't exist. There are a lot of people who say it does. There are a lot of people who have created a mythos that kind of reminds me of the Pony Express, and how wonderful it was when the reality is it didn't last that long. Your background goes back to a time when structure was part of the base, and in that structure, of course, were moral foundations and expectations.
Yep.
Would you like to talk about that just a little? What was expected of you?
So the man that originally taught me was old guard trained. Okay. He was a veteran.
Thank you.
Korean War. The man that I ended up getting to know and call my friend, who went by the name of Tom Magister. And I spent about 2 years having in-depth conversations about the old guard, because he was trained by the old guard. He was considered a part of the old guard.
I was going to say, all things considered, that was Tom's era.
Yeah. And essentially, the guard, the way leather developed in the US, was it came out of World War II and the camaraderie that the men that fought in the war felt for each other. and a desire to be able to have that in civilian life.
Bingo.
And they did not differentiate straight by what you were either part of them or not. But they were very, very selective. You don't play with crazy. And these men had been through stuff that would make most people's hair turn white.
But it was also part of the bonding that created that original fraternity of
Yes.
sorts.
But they had, some basic codes about roles and how you needed to think about what you were doing and who you were being, that essentially didn't accept people that were not mentally fit for service in the leather lifestyle. It sounds harsh sometimes, but a person who's unstable can be hiding all kinds of very unhealthy psychosis behind either, a sadistic or masochistic personality.
True.
They tended to interview people very carefully until they felt comfortable that it was not something driven by an underlying condition.
But is that not also an extension of the interviews and weeding out process that at least I know of the Corps because of so many Marines in my family?
Well, the military does a pretty decent job of weeding out the non-functional. Okay. Not quite as good a job of taking care of the people that are going to be unable to deal with the reality of what we're training to do.
True, that is the aftermath. But in thinking, and this isn't meant to glamorize, but in thinking of the few, the proud, it has always seemed to me that the structure, more of the Marines than any other branch of the armed forces, is more particular in terms of the men that, well, men and women now, but men that they accept because of the values, because of the personality traits, because of the expectations.
Well, I could go on forever about, what the Corps is doing with that. Okay. The reality is that in the Marine Corps, every man's a rifleman first, every man or woman. Everybody in the Marine Corps is trained to be a combat Marine, regardless of their specialty.
Understood.
The Marine Corps has always had a longer training period than any of the other services. It's twice what, when I went in, it was twice what the Navy's was for boot camp. We had 12-week boot camp. The Army had 8-week boot camp. I think the Air Force had an 8-week boot camp. And a lot of that is because instilling that basic training of being a combat Marine takes time, and the stress of the training weeds out a lot of the people who just aren't going to be able to do it.
And when I was coming out in the early 70s, the stress of just finding us weeded out a whole lot of the riffraff, the looky-loo, the
getting selected first you had to find a leather guard. And if you were going around to gay clubs, it was hard to find a gay club because we certainly didn't advertise. And then to find a leather bar, that was even tougher. And then when you got there, you had to figure out what the protocol was to even get talked to. There was a hurdle required. Okay. You had to show the desire to do the work. I mean, I had it easy because I had a guy pick me up. But for the most part, if you were trying to find it from the outside, it was hard. Okay. Then you had to get over the psychological hurdle of it, the acceptability of our particular way of loving.
And to some extent, wasn't the core the same way? Because to the outsider,
Mhm.
that creation of the group is a form of loving. It is both a loving of self, of the core you serve,
You will,
of the unit.
in movies, often hear a drill instructor saying, "What makes you think you belong in my beloved Marine Corps?" And they and all of us see it as our beloved Marine Corps. That's our family. That's the backbone of the nation to us. And it's exemplified in a lot of ways, but statistically, I will give you this. More medals of honor have been issued to Marines than all of the other armed forces combined. Most of them posthumously. Because we don't quit ever. Once we decide we're going to do something, end of discussion. We're going to do that. So getting into the leather world, once I decided I wanted in, I was going to do anything I had to do to get in. And it had some interesting challenges along the way. Getting to the point where I was allowed to top was a challenge. I had to go through some shit just to prove I was determined and worth it.
That's what I was wondering about. Now, looking back with the clarity of hindsight,
Mhm.
what were the men who welcomed you into the leather corps
Mhm.
looking for or looking at when they were looking at that 17-year-old? Any speculation?
Well, I know what the first guy was looking at.
That's enough for a good
I was
fuck.
I was attractive chicken, but
that's not enough for more than one night.
No, it's
or
not.
introductions or anything else.
Honesty, stability, commitment, honor, the same things that the military expects of us were the things that they expected of us. Okay. I don't see a dividing line between the two. Those men wouldn't generally get involved. I mean, the guy that fucked me didn't know I was 17. He thought I was older than that. But I've been a big fella and pretty well built my whole life because of the hard work that I did as a kid. And I lied. Because I wanted to get fucked. I wanted to know what that was like. Because I had never been with a man before that. I mean, the stuff we do as kids,
Yeah, that doesn't count.
That doesn't count. But there was a standard of commitment to being responsible, top or bottom, didn't matter, to the health of the community, responsible to the stability of the community. Okay. If somebody got abusive with somebody, the person that got abusive got schooled. Period. It wasn't tolerated. You couldn't be around those men. You know, and I'm saying this based on a lot of my conversations with Tom.
Understood.
You know, my experience with the guy that was teaching me was that he never abused me once. He never did anything I said no to.
But it's so easy for me to hear community and core almost interchangeably.
It is.
Would you
The thing that most people don't understand about the Marine Corps is that, and because they've never experienced the kind of camaraderie and commitment that we have, is that I'm still a Marine today.
Oh yeah, and will be until the day after you die.
Yep. And then some, probably, because my hair will still be growing a while, just because it's stubborn. Okay. When you come into the leather community, you have to be so clear and committed that you don't have to put on a piece of leather because you're wearing it every day as your skin. It's who you are. It's not what you wear or what you do. So, you know, it's the same thing to me. The same things are there. Yeah, the criteria may be a little bit different, but the baseline of it, you know, the taxonomy of it are essentially the same.
Now that is the value of the core.
That's the value of the old guard.
Now, individually, we go from the group to the individual,
Mhm.
whether it be top or bottom,
Mhm.
daddy, boy, whatever.
Mhm.
When those values transfer to the individual, what do you see as the path from the group to the path within the mind of the individual in terms of betterment, evolution, growth?
Well, I don't see much of that now.
Then
Much more. You know, essentially, you take what you've been taught and you try to improve on it. Okay. And that's the responsibility that you have. When you fuck up, you own the mistake. You try to figure out how you made the mistake. You make amends for the mistake, which includes trying to correct the behavior that allowed the mistake. Okay. And try and be better as you're moving forward. The group can't control the individual, never could. But they could ostracize them.
true that.
Okay. And they did. Okay. There was a lot of rebellion around not being selected or being ostracized. In some respects, you know, I understand the reasons that people were upset and wanted to do their own thing. But I also recognize that the power that comes with what we do, the ability to truly fuck up a human being, is so massive that I wish we were still guided by some of the old principles, because because I've seen some pretty huge fuck ups. I've made some of my own.
We all do, sir, but there is also that expectation of understanding and growth that goes with it. That's part of what makes that mentor say you have the potential to be.
Yeah. And a thinking person, someone who's capable of rational, critical thought, who uses that tool all the time, not just when it's convenient, okay, will continue down the path of honor and duty and responsibility. Okay. I see far too often now people who engage in behavior that doesn't pass the smell test, that's not safe, that is unskilled. Okay. I mean, every implement that I have in the toolbox, I've had used on me at some time or another. Okay. Even if it was just to get the experience of what it felt like from the other end.
Understood.
Okay. You didn't apply an implement until you had mastered the skill to apply the instrument. When I'm throwing a single tail whip at a human's back, I have the ability to cut them to the bone. I can do major damage. If I hit them in the wrong place, I can kill them.
Here, here.
Okay. I better be accurate. Okay. So that whatever damage that I'm applying, because I am applying damage when I'm throwing a single tail whip. There's no question about that. It's only the damage that is acceptable and safe. The vast majority of people who call themselves cops now have never bought up to any of it. And rebel at the thought that they should. And my question that keeps coming up in my mind, then how do you know what effect you're having on the psychology of the person that you're working on and on their body chemistry?
Ooh, you just treaded into what this generation would say is some very dangerous ground.
Well, if they don't like the language of the responsibility of being a top, fuck them.
It isn't the language, it's the concept that I should at all. Or more
Look,
casually, why should it matter?
I don't much care that they don't think they should or that they don't think it matters. What I care about is that there's a human being on the receiving end. Everything that we do, every sensation that we create, every action that we take when we're working affects their psychology and their body chemistry. And if you learn to control that, you can take them places that they never dreamt they could go. If you don't learn the tool, which is their mind and body chemistry, and how to manipulate it with the tools that you keep in your toolbox, then you're no fucking good and you don't belong. It's that simple. They're not doing the work in a responsible way.
I want to bring you back 5 sentences.
Yeah.
In talking about the mind as the primary tool.
Mm-hmm.
Not the toy, not the implement, the mind.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk to me a little more about that? Not just in terms of the interaction, but in terms of the primary tool within the person.
So people used to ask me what I was good at. Right. And I used to say, God gave other people minds for me to fuck with. And I'm real good at it. Because human experience is perception.
Here, here.
Okay. Perception is truth to the individuals that's perceiving.
Here, here.
If their perception is X, then X is their truth. Okay. Well, I kind of like the idea of true submission. And I am a sadist. So I generally want to engage in putting the mind in the object of my work in a place that is truly submissive to me and in as much masochistic experience as I can that is survivable. Okay? And that's the line. Okay? You can be working on somebody who's brand new, who wants to just have the experience. They're not sure if they're interested or not. If you have that kind of control, if you understand how to read the body and the way it's responding, so that you've got some concept of what's going on up here, okay, you can give them a safe and pleasant, so to speak, experience their first time. Excuse me, sorry about that, folks. If you have the heaviest bottom on the planet, you can also take them to the very edge and dangle them over and tell them you're going to drop them and have them believe it. It's all in understanding what's going on up here, because I'm sorry, without this, the little head isn't going to go. Okay? And it's all about the pleasure of the experience. Okay? That's what we're doing it for, to get some satisfaction of a certain itch.
On both sides.
On both sides. Okay? But if you don't understand what's going on, and you don't understand that the sensation of a single tail whip and what it does to the body chemistry and to the brain versus a flogger or a cat or a cane, you're playing with that or driving without a map. You don't even have your freaking eyes open. Okay? It's not, you're not ever gonna take that person where they have the possibility to go. Okay. If you're a psychotic sadist and that's your thing, fine. Okay. Then it really is torture that you're getting off on. Our world isn't the place for you. You need to go back to 1600 Spain and join Torquemada. Okay. If you want to be in my world, you need to master what you're doing. And the implement that you're trying to master is not the tool, it's the brain and the person that you're working with. You have to master your own mind first.
Ooh. Oh, sir, would you expound on that?
We use the word master in our lifestyle. Tom and I had a long conversation about this word. The old guard used the word master too. But to get the word master, you had to have mastered yourself in your craft first. Okay. You had to have demonstrated a complete and thorough understanding, okay, of yourself, of the work that you were doing, and have demonstrated that you could do it safely. That means that you actually have to be truly honest with yourself. And unfortunately, I don't know very many people can actually say that they're really honest with themselves, because it's not comfortable to be honest with yourself 100% of the time, because then you have to own your fuck ups, and you have to own your insecurities, and you have to own everything. Okay. So, yeah, mastery, or being a master, is much more than the top role, or having the authority, so to speak, to do whatever the fuck you want, because you still don't have that no matter what.
I want to take you off leather for a minute, because last night you and I were talking about the concepts of honesty with self.
Yeah.
You keep repeating that it is the ability to be honest with self is a difficult process.
Yeah.
And why?
So science has proven that there are 7 centers in the brain that respond to basic emotions. Okay. One of those centers is shame. We actually have a brain chemistry reaction when we're feeling ashamed. Okay. We feel ashamed of the things that we know we should not be doing. Okay. This is certainly different than the construct we call guilt.
Guilt. Understood.
Okay.
Understood.
Because this is a biological reaction. Okay. Most people do not have a heightened awareness of shame. They don't like feeling ashamed, so they don't question why they feel that way, and they avoid it. You can't be honest with yourself and not also experience shame when you fuck up. That's why it's so difficult. Okay, think about it this way. It's a good example. Okay, we all know what happened in Enron. Where did it start?
All right, that's a series of bad executive decisions.
No.
Decisions that.
No. You know where it started? It started in a classroom in grade school, when the opportunity arose to be able to look at the paper next to you and copy the answer, and you made the decision to do that. You knew you shouldn't. You felt shame at that point, but you overrode the shame to do it anyway, because you were too fucking lazy to do the work yourself. Okay. So the next time the opportunity arose, you didn't feel as ashamed of doing it, because you desensitized that particular reaction. You start down that slippery slope, and you keep going down that slippery slope until something gets you to turn around to say, hold it. I really don't like where I'm at. I don't like what I'm doing. Why am I doing it? And what do I need to do to correct it?
But does the correction require shame of the behavior, or can it not just be looked at as black or white?
You can't experience a memory of an activity and not feel what was there.
True.
So you're going to feel ashamed of the things that you should have felt ashamed for. You can't begin the rebuilding process until you rebuild the ability to be ashamed of a behavior and to be okay experiencing it. That's why, I mean, if you look at the 12-step programs, okay, you know, the first 3 steps are generally about just accepting that you don't have any power over whatever. Okay. The next 3 steps are about understanding what you did. Okay. The next 3 steps after that are about rebuilding the ability to experience shame and make amends for what you've done. And that amends process is 2 things. It's making apologies where you're not going to cause harm, and then doing the work that it takes to not repeat the behavior.
True. Right.
Okay. The reason 12-step programs work in people is because of that segment. Pure and simple. When you go to a psychotherapist to deal with your problems, okay, whatever it is, at some point you have to do a rebuilding process.
Sure.
And in that rebuilding process, if it was because of behavior that you engaged in or weren't subject to, or your response to behavior that you were subject to that triggered shame, you still have to deal with it. Okay. Because it's so fucking uncomfortable to be ashamed of yourself. Most people won't be honest. They'll find all kinds of ways to avoid whatever it is. So you won't be honest.
Isn't it easier simply to correct the behavior than to run?
Well, one would think, but no. That's why psychologists spend so much time with people trying to get them to just be honest with themselves. I mean, think about it this way, okay? Another example. You know how hard it used to be for a guy to admit he liked sucking dick? Even if he was gay and that was all he could think about, because he had been programmed to be ashamed of the fact that he liked sucking dick.
Or simply afraid of the societal pressure that's going to come from the admission.
Okay. The whole community had to create a way for us to be okay with that. Okay. But the individual still had to be honest and own up to the like, hey, I like sucking dick. The most violence that occurs, anti-gay violence, is usually coming from people who are repressing the urge to go suck dick.
True that.
Okay. And that's the way of avoiding the fact that they want to go suck dick. So which would have been easier, acknowledging that they like to suck dick or beating the crap out of the guy, which is less painful for them?
It is so much easier.
What's less? Yeah, it's so much easier in our minds, but in their minds, it's a catastrophic event. So they find a way to avoid the catastrophic event. We do that as human nature. We are a pleasure-seeking habitual animal. Okay? We don't do things that we don't find pleasurable, generally, at least not willingly. Okay? And we build habits around getting pleasure.
But sir, we also build habits around greater values.
No, we build habits around getting pleasure because it brings us pleasure to have those greater values. There's a payoff that's pleasurable.
I'm going to reserve the right to agree or disagree on
Okay.
that one.
Okay. But, you know, we have to accept that people have an incredibly hard time with administering self-pain, self-unpleasant, okay?
Discipline. Let's call it
Well,
self-discipline.
okay,
Yeah.
discipline. Because it's so damn hard, a lot of people will just avoid acknowledging their truths. Their subconscious mind is processing that stuff all the time. There's nothing you can do to stop that. That's why, I mean, there's a great book called Blink that talks about how this works. Okay. And it's all based in neuroscience. But the bottom line is when you walk into a room and look around, they're going to be people that you just don't want to be close to. And they're going to be people that you do want to be close to. And your subconscious mind has measured all of the indicators. And that's
Instantly.
what in a blink. Okay. The example I gave you last night was, and this has been tested. Okay. If you put 100 people in a room for just a little cocktail party, get together kind of thing, right? You put one known child of an alcoholic coming in one door on one side of the room, and you put a known alcoholic, whether he's dry or not, coming in the door at the other side of the room, the two of them will get together and be comfortable with each other.
Old wives used to call that bad boy syndrome.
Why do women who have grown up in a house with abuse have a tendency to end up with somebody who is abusive? Okay. And you could switch the sexes, could be the same. It doesn't. Why does a person who's been abused as a child end up either being an abuser or being with an abuser? It's because their founding experiences form a comfort zone. Whether they were pleasant or not doesn't matter. It's familiar and comfortable. Okay. You're attracted to what's familiar and comfortable. You have to admit that and start working to change that to avoid this over here. It's uncomfortable to admit that. A lot of people never get there. Okay. Well, with what we do and the level of unmitigated shit we can cause, you got to be honest about where you're at. And you got to be comfortable from my side of things, knowing that the person that I'm choosing to work with is in a good place. Okay. Because if I take you to the edge of the cliff and then dangle you out there to convince you that I'm going to drop you, I need to know that I'm not stepping on an anti-tank mine.
True.
And as much as experience I had, I still have run across people that have hidden buttons that all of a sudden go off, and it comes back to stuff that they've experienced in their lives that they don't want to deal with.
Or may not realize they even have.
So that introspection, self-honesty, dealing with whatever is there is very difficult for people because it's not comfortable. And because it's not comfortable, we don't enjoy it. We don't do it. Right?
You hinted at a lot of that in the Master's Lament.
Mhm.
There is so much in that page and a half that at some point I am going to encourage people to either read it or put it up so that it can be read.
Mhm. So I gave it to you.
But it speaks far more to an internal lament than an external.
Absolutely. Look, the standard that I was taught is that I'm responsible for each person that comes under my hand. You know, sometimes that responsibility is cursory. You know, I go to a dungeon, somebody wants to work a little, okay, you know, and we never see each other again.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's somebody in the community that I'm going to see all the time. Right? Sometimes it's somebody I want to actually spend some extensive time working with.
Mhm.
The level of involvement doesn't change the fact that once you've come under my hand, if you call on me, I have a responsibility to you. So if I fuck you up, it's my job to fix it. And that doesn't end. Just because we're not together doesn't mean that I have a right to walk away from the responsibility. It's dedication to what we wrought. My job is to provide a safe, healthy experience for myself and for my partner.
Forgive me, I'm seeing another face as I'm listening to you. I'm seeing the face of a man that I adored by the name of Jack Jackson, who, at this point, you could be just about interchangeable with, who instilled those values in the very early Eulenspiegel Society
Mhm.
in terms of not just responsibility in the moment, but an understanding of the creation of the circle you're making and how wide it can be,
Mhm.
and all of the things that become a part of it. So, forgive
Yeah,
me, I'm having a bit of a moment.
I understand. I can see it.
Oh,
But that's us.
and
That's
damn, I miss that man.
what makes us who we are. That level of commitment. That's why Marine's always a Marine. And a Leatherman is always a Leatherman, whether he's wearing leather or not. And he's going to, if he has truly dedicated himself to us, he's going to carry those values and behave that way in everything.
Now, I want to take a minute and bring you forward 45 years.
Mm.
I heard that. Just in case you think I didn't,
Mhm.
I heard that.
It's 49, but who's count?
No, I want to bring you forward about 45 years
Oh, okay.
to observations on now based on the values we just talked about.
Yeah.
Yes, you and I have talked about the fact that the community is, I say, evolving. So many of the people that I came out with, and in terms of my height, I'm a year and a half younger than you, but we came out in
Mhm.
different places.
Yeah.
I believe in evolution. I have a problem with change because change can be very, very radical without base. Evolution at least has a base that continues on.
Well, if you look at the theory of evolution, it's not survival of the fittest. It's a survival of those who adapt the fastest.
Fastest, agreed.
Okay. It's a question of what is a suitable adaptation.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not impressed in general with the community that we have now, because a lot of the adaptions have left the values that I think were important behind.
Then is it adaptation or change? Are we talking about the evolution, the growth
No,
of a completely different community?
well, if we are, it's not a community I want to be a part of. Okay. I don't like the idea of people creating the amount of damage that I see being created. I don't like the idea that people won't take responsibility for their conduct and for their behavior and for what they rock.
Now, again, devil's advocate to that argument.
Yeah,
Is that a community issue or a human one?
probably a little of both. But I think that what I'm saying is also contributing to a disintegration of the community that I know we built. And that bothers me sometimes, is being an elder, wanting to know that what I did was good and contributed.
And foundation.
Yeah. And I know that Tom was unhappy because he and I talked about that. That was literally at the core of our conversations all the time. Well, how do we address this? What do we say? How do we, affect it? That kind of thing. And Tom was a really smart sumbitch. I'm a reasonably smart sumbitch. I know a lot of really smart people, and none of us have come up with an answer, because diplomacy, not wanting to hurt anybody's little feelings, is getting in way too much, instead of us looking them straight in the eye and telling them that they're assholes and they're behaving like assholes and that they're irresponsible, and standing there and taking their slights, but continuing to give them examples of exactly how they're behaving like assholes and the damage that they're doing. I went to about 10 years ago, one of the local dungeons where I live. I'm not going to give names, because decided they wanted to do a mass interrogation scene.
Okay.
Okay. The bottoms that were participating were all part of a terrorist cell that was going to do something. And the interrogator's job was to get the information from them. I'm the only person that broke one of the subjects. God gave other people minds for me to fuck with, and I'm real good at it. And this guy was a het bottom, but he gave permission for full body contact, which included his cock and balls. And I sat there for about 15 minutes with a violet wand, working over his cock and balls, until he finally said, "Red, I'm out." And then he had to give up all his information. The leader of the group ended up on the table next. And I took a vascular clamp and clamped it down on her clitoris, not the hook. I got her clitoris out and clamped that sucker on it. And one of my partners at the table complained that I was going to break her too fast because she was saying yellow, and we're going, hold it, there ain't no fucking yellow here. It's red or we keep going. Okay. Because the objective was to get the information, not to find and have fun torturing people. Okay.
And someone, I get the feeling, forgot to set up some of the parameters for this.
Well, let's see what kind of unsafe behaviors were going on in the rest of the dungeon, shall we? And I'm a qualified dungeon master more times than I care to count. And I got qualified at Threshold in LA, which they really required something. Okay. You just didn't walk in and become a dungeon master for them. You had to prove that you knew what you were doing. Station to my right was an electrical station. The guy was affixing electrodes to the back and had an electric shock plate that would come into contact with the front.
Isn't there a set of internal organs in there?
There's
somewhere?
a set of internal organs,
Heart,
including the
anything like
heart.
that? Yeah, that one.
And it only takes 1 or 0.1 milliamps to cause the heart to go into ventricular fibrillation. Anything more than that, you're going to stop this fucking thing. And the dungeon master that took me out of the game because the person on my team complained because I was going to get the information too soon, let that go on. The station to my left had a suspended stocks, basically, 2 ropes holding a stock set. They had a person in the stocks, and the person who was acting as the interrogator in that position was kneeing and kicking the person. If the person had fallen, lost their footing, they could have broken their neck. Nobody stopped that.
No.
Okay. So, needless to say, I don't go to that dungeon anymore because I don't trust any of the people there or the people that run it to understand what actually is safe. I'd seen some questionable things there a few times. Okay. And I've given demos there, including a fear play conversation, which is one of my favorite things. So the standard that I consider safe requires expertise. It requires mastery of the craft. And the craft doesn't stop with the tool that's in your hand. It stops in the brainstem of the human that you're working on. So I'm not very compromising on this issue. It's going to lead to things like the murder that occurred in Clarksville from purely unsafe behavior.
Yeah.
Okay. Or from what I've heard from people that know the people, an attitude that master can do whatever master wants.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I'm not going to be diplomatic and pat the little babies on the fanny and tell them they're doing good, because there's lives at risk. There's psychology or psyches at risk. I can't tell you how many people I've worked with that had landmines that were put there by some incompetent motherfucker swinging a whip.
Yeah.
Or thinking that he was master and had never been taught a fucking thing.
Here.
Okay. So no, I'm not going to be generous. I'm not going to call it evolution. I'm going to call it entropy.
Oh,
because that's what it is to me, because it's those crazy motherfuckers that are going to get us put back in the DSM as a committable
yes.
group. Because as far as I'm concerned, they are committable. They have no concern for human life and health. They don't, if you don't practice basic safety, okay, what the fuck?
Sir, I want to put a pin in that for the sake of Zoom and pick up on that concern for human life in part 2.